Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of ATP, Ask the Pastor. I am Pastor Joshua Sullivan at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kerrville, Texas. Before we get to today's question, just a few housekeeping items. First, if you have not done so already, I encourage you to subscribe to ATP. Make sure and click the notification bell as you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. I also want to encourage you to share ATP's videos on social media with your friends that you think may benefit from the ministry here at ATP. And finally, if you feel so moved and you would like to support the ministry of ATP, I have included the link to our PayPal account in the video description below. With that said, I also want to thank those who have already generously donated. Thank you very much for your support. Having said that, let's get to today's question. Dear Pastor, I'm Roman Catholic and have a fascination with Luther's writings. I've noticed that as I've read his writings, he viewed his movement, for lack of a better term, as evangelical or evangelical Catholic. I understand he preferred his followers to be referred to as such because he did not like people calling his followers Lutheran, because he did not like to draw attention to himself or something. Now, with that being said, are there still Lutheran church bodies in the United States that fall under the classification of Evangelical Catholic and are still performing the high ritual ceremony I'm sure Luther would have wanted? Can you please explain what Luther meant by Evangelical Catholic? So I'm not familiar with Luther having ever said that he preferred or even used the term Evangelical Catholic to describe his movement or those who followed the Reformation. Now, it is true that he didn't care one bit for the name Lutheran. That was originally a pejorative term coined by his chief papist opponent Johann Eck. He, in fact, in many places writes that he preferred his followers to simply be called Christians, named after Christ. And that is a reflection of the fact that Luther never sought to start a new church, but rather what Luther wanted to do, as we've said before, is simply to reform the church. Now, Lutherans did call themselves evangelicals because of their focus on the evangel, or the gospel of justification by grace through faith alone for Christ's sake. But to the best of my knowledge, they never called themselves Catholics. Now, that word they do use to describe their doctrine and their worship in the Augsburg Confession. The Augsburg Confession even ends on that point. It says, "In doctrine and ceremonies, nothing has been received on our part against Scripture or the Church Catholic. For it is manifest that we have taken most diligent care that no new and ungodly doctrine should creep into our churches." So when the Lutheran Confessions say that their doctrine is Catholic, they're simply confessing that they believe the common Christian faith that the Church has always taught. Now, when they say that their ceremonies are in agreement with the Church Catholic, what they mean is that they worship in the common way that the Church has always worshipped. Now, the Lutheran Confessions say this even more explicitly in the 24th article of the Augsburg Confession, where it says that Lutherans retain the Mass and all of its usual ceremonies, but of course reform to the false teachings and false practices that have been added throughout the centuries. Now, of these two words, evangelical and Catholic, Catholic never really caught on as an identifier for the Lutherans, whereas evangelical did. Now, that wasn't a denial of the fact that their doctrine is truly Catholic, but it's simply, as we see today, that the word Catholic is already taken. It's in the name, Roman Catholic Church. So Luther, again, to the best of my knowledge, never used the term evangelical Catholic, nor did anyone else when describing themselves as Lutherans or when opponents were describing the Lutherans. In fact, in the official legal documents of the empire from the 16th and 17th centuries, such as the Peace of Augsburg of 1555 and also the Treaty of Westphalia of 1648 that ended the 30 Years' War, the empire consistently refers to the Lutherans as adherents of the Augsburg Confession, which is a pretty good name, even down to this day. Now, the term evangelical Catholic has recently come into vogue among many Lutherans. And generally what they mean by that is what we've said already, that their doctrine is evangelical and that it centers on the evangel, on the gospel of justification by faith alone for Christ's sake. And what they mean also is that their doctrine is truly Catholic in that it's nothing new, but it's simply the common Christian faith that the Church has always taught since the time of the apostles. And I think as long as we understand the term evangelical Catholic in that way, I think it's a good way of describing what it means to be Lutheran and describing Lutheran doctrine and practice. Now, when it comes to using the term to describe worship, though, things get a bit messier. In my experience, whenever someone describes themselves as Evangelical Catholic, referring to worship, what they mean is that they want a lot of the medieval ceremonies in worship. And sometimes people will even use the term Evangelical Catholic as a synonym for High Church. But quite frankly, the term High Church should have no place among Lutherans because the term is Anglican and it has doctrinal connotations with it. It's more than simply liking smells and bells. And so I think it's simply better to say what the confessions say, that Lutherans retain the Mass, that is the divine service, and also that each parish can have fewer or more ceremonies depending on local custom. Now, while it's true that the Lutheran confessions state that we retain the Mass with all the usual ceremonies, the confessions never tell us what those usual ceremonies are. And the reason for that is because of what they confess about church unity. So in Article 7 of the Augsburg Confession, to the true unity of the Church it is enough to agree concerning the doctrine of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments. Nor is it necessary that human traditions, that is, rites or ceremonies instituted by men, should be everywhere alike. So the division between High Church and Low Church in Lutheranism is really a division between those who worship, as the confessions say, and those who worship like Pietists, or like Methodists, or Pentecostals, or Baptists. And I think that common use of the term as a synonym for High Church, I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think the term Evangelical Catholic is any good as an identifier, a self-identifier for Lutherans. While we're on that, there's a couple other reasons why I don't think the term is adequate as a name. And the first is that it transcends confessional boundaries. So there are pastors that identify as Evangelical Catholic across different church bodies. So you can have LCMS pastors and ELCA pastors, both identifying as Evangelical Catholic. And I think that empties the term of any meaning because there are serious differences between those two church bodies, not only in what the Catholic faith is, but also serious disagreements on even how the Augsburg Confession and the other Lutheran confessional documents should be understood and employed. Another reason that I don't care for the term is, frankly, it's confusing to the general populace. It requires the same amount of explanation, if not more, than the name Lutheran does. And I think there's some historical precedent for this. C.F.W. Walther, in the first issues of Der Lutheraner, rejects calls for Lutherans to call themselves evangelicals or Catholics because even at that time, both designations had baggage that can't be disassociated in people's minds. And so he makes the point that evangelical, in our day, means either one of the many facets of the Reformed Church and its theology, or it means doctrinal ambivalence. And he also makes the point that the papists have had the name Catholic locked down for centuries. Now, on that note, it's also worth saying that there is a group within the Roman Catholic Church that calls itself Evangelical Catholic. And to be Evangelical Catholic within Romanism means that you're a big proponent of Vatican II and its new attitude of the Church towards the world that's set forth in that council. In fact, the Evangelical Catholics who are Romanists, who are Papists, even claim that Pope Francis is the paragon of Evangelical Catholicism. And so that there demonstrates just how malleable, just how moldable the term is, depending on who's using it and why they're using it. So it's simply my opinion in this that Lutherans just need to stick with calling themselves Lutheran. And we're not being sectarian by doing that. I think if Lutherans are seriously looking for another name, then we should go with what we were legally called at the time of the Reformation and post-Reformation, adherents of the Augsburg Confession. And now, I do think that evangelical and Catholic as adjectives should be used to explain to people what Lutherans believe and why Lutherans worship the way they do, and why Lutherans order themselves the way they do. Because Lutherans are truly evangelical in that we're gospel people. Every doctrine and every ceremony reflects the doctrine of the gospel of the justification by faith alone. And not only that then, but when we confess that we're Catholic, it's simply saying that this is the common Christian faith that's been taught in Scripture all throughout history then. Now, those words work as a way of describing what Lutherans confess about themselves, but I don't think they really work as a self-identifier or as a name. I think they serve better simply as adjectives of describing what it means to be truly Lutheran and what it means to truly be an adherent of the Augsburg Confession. Thanks for the question. We'll see you next time on ATP Ask the Pastor.